I've been running an air shock on my bike for quite a while now, but today I'm switching to a coil shock for the very first time to see if this thing lives up to the hype. If you're thinking about making this upgrade too, but not quite sure if you should, then follow along as I take you through my experience upgrading from air to a coil shock. By the end of this video, I'll let you know if I think it was worth it and ultimately help you decide if this is the right upgrade for you. This is my Polygon Colossus N9. It's a full suspension mountain bike with 170 millimeters of rear travel provided by this Fox Float X2 rear shock. But this shock has one major problem. The seals on this shock are failing, which means it needs to be sent back into Fox for a warranty repair or maybe even a replacement. And I figured this is a perfect time to go ahead and try out a coil shock. I mean, I've always heard people talking about how much they love their coil shocks. They're always talking about like how much more plush the coil shocks feel, how much better traction you have, better small bump sensitivity, no air leaks. But I definitely have my concerns, you know. I've always been a guy that likes to jump, you know, hit every jump I can on the trail. I've always worried that that super plush feeling would take away from the poppiness of the bike. And then anytime I've looked into getting a coil just to test out, there's just like the complexity of like choosing the right coil shock with the right spring rate. And then of course there's the cost associated with it. What if I spend all that time doing the research and all that money and I hate it? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. Stick around to the end, find out if this was an upgrade or something I'm gonna regret. Now initially I was gonna go with the cheaper shock, something like the Marzocchi Bomber CR, but I ended up landing on the Fox DHX2, which isn't cheap, but it's the most comparable to the Fox X2 shock I'm taking off this bike. And I think that's the best way to really test a coil versus an air shock to see which one you prefer the most. But choosing that more expensive shock actually ended up being the easiest part of this whole process, because then I had to make sure I got it in the right size with the right spring, the right mounting hardware. And I'm still hoping this is all gonna work out right when I throw this thing on the bike a little bit later and take this out for a ride. To find the size, I went ahead and just Googled, you know, Polygon Colossus N9, went on to the Bikes Online website right here. And actually, you know what, you guys? There's some pretty freaking good sales on these bikes right now. This Polygon N9 originally cost $3,500. It's on sale for $25.99. I'll have affiliate links down there in the description to the bike I got here and also some of the parts and pieces I got from the Lost Co. Those affiliate links do help support the channel and help me continue to make more videos just like this right here. All right, so now that I'm on there, go ahead and just scroll down towards the bottom and you're looking for the bike specs right here. So specifications and comparisons. Click on that tab, find the shock, and you can see right here, my Fox Float X2 for this Polygon Colossus N9 is 205 by 65. So 205 being that eye to eye length, 205 millimeters, and 65 being that 65 millimeter stroke length, which gives you 170 millimeters of travel with this suspension design back here. So that's the overall size of the shock that I chose on this DHX2. Next, I needed to find the right coil. And this is where things are kind of complicated if you're like me and you're doing this for the first time. You see, with an air shock like this, you can just add more air right there or take it out to make your shock feel a little bit more stiff or a little bit more plush. But with a coil shock, you really don't have that option. You have to make sure you choose the right spring for the right rider weight and your bike's suspension design. And if you get it wrong, you're either gonna have to sell that coil and buy a new one or keep that coil in case you want, you know, different coils for a softer or harsher setup. And in order to do that effectively, you have to choose a coil with the right spring rate based on the rider's weight and that bike's suspension design. Luckily, I found the guys over at Lostco that helped me through this whole process. You see, on the Lostco website, they have this spring rate calculator. Let me pull this up. And using that, you go ahead and put in your rider weight. So I put in 195 pounds. Okay, this is where you really gotta be honest with yourself. How much do you actually weigh with all your kit and your riding gear on? If you don't know that number, that means you're gonna have to throw all your gear on, hop on the scale. For me, it's more like 200. Then you put in the wheel travel on there in millimeters, so that's the 170 millimeters I talked about, and the shock stroke, which we looked up earlier, that's 65 millimeters. Calculate that out, and you got a result of 499 pound spring. But I was a little bit hesitant on just taking that number and ordering a coil. I wanted to make sure. So I reached out to Mike from the Lostco, and he explained that that calculator really just gives you a starting point. You still need to factor in riding style, rider preference, the suspension design platform on your bike. Now, Mike said he usually recommends starting out with one of these cheaper tester springs before moving on to, the more expensive Fox super light steel springs like this right here. Unfortunately for me, you guys, at the time of filming this video, that cheaper spring was not available. So Mike went ahead, asked me a bunch of different questions, made sure he was doing his best to get me the right spring. And I ended up going with this 500 pound by 2.9 inch Fox super light spring right here. And I'm just gonna have to throw it on the bike, and hopefully we chose right. Another thing he helped me figure out was the mounting hardware for this, because I want to be able to swap these shocks out back to back, to do that testing like I talked about in future videos. So he made sure I took the right measurements, got the right mounting hardware, the right bushings for this shock to be able to install it on that bike right there. That's a little bit harder than I thought it would be, getting that thing pushed in by hand. I'm sure they make a tool for this. Did I tell you this is my first time doing this? We'll get it figured out though. Mike's got a bunch of videos on YouTube where he explains all this stuff in much greater detail than I'm going into right now. So definitely check the link in the video description. I'll throw the video down there where he talks you through how to choose the right coil shock. This video is not sponsored by the Lostco, but definitely got to give him props for helping me out. There you go. We got the Fox DHX2 shock 205 by 65 size with that Fox SLS 500 pound by 2.9 inch coil spring. We got the mounting hardware all installed on there. Now we just gotta see if this thing fits. Hardware in, that front screw through. Yes, it fits like a glove. We'll get that back wheel throw on here. We'll get this thing taken out for the first ride. What do you guys think about that orange coil on this bike where I got most of like silver accents? I'm thinking I'm gonna try and, if I decide to stick with this coil shock and I love it, like people say I'm going to, I think I'm gonna try and paint this coil like chrome it out or silver it to match this. What do you guys think? Leave a comment down below. Let's get this bike put back together, take it out for a ride. All right, so the coil shock fit on there. I'm stoked. Thank you, Mike, for helping me out with all those measurements and getting the right selection. But I still gotta get this bike off the stand, set the sag, and make sure I got the right weight spring. It's a moment of truth, folks. All right, so got all my riding gear on, or at least, close enough. I don't usually ride in jeans, but I'm somewhere around my riding weight. And I'm just gonna follow the instructions on Mike's YouTube videos. Go ahead and look in the link in the video description. I'll throw it down there from the Lostco. Mike goes over all this in a lot more detail. But let's see if I chose the right spring. All right, so I'm gonna start by pushing that dust wiper all the way down right there. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and slowly sit on the bike, lifting my feet up off the ground, gently get back up. Then I'm gonna measure the distance that that dust wiper has moved right there, which for me was about 18 millimeters. So then you go ahead, take that 18 millimeters, divide it by the overall stroke of the shock, so divided by 65 for me. And then you go ahead and times that number by 100, or just move the decimal over 2 spots. And you got about 27.69% sag, which you're looking for around 30% sag, but I told Mike that I really like more aggressive style riding and I like my suspension to be just a little bit more stiff. So I think we picked the right coil, but there's really only one way to find out. Let's take this bike out for a ride. So final verdict, do I think this coil shock was worth it? Well, the setup went good, got this thing in there, the shock fit, the sag worked great, which means I chose the right coil. In comparison to my air shock right here, I was actually surprised how good that shock felt. It's feeling plush, like super plush, even though I was just kind of rolling down my driveway right there, like super sensitive off the top, but I thought it was gonna be blown through that mid-travel like way more, and it didn't. It still felt pretty damn supportive, so I think I'm gonna have to wait for the sun to rise again, go out and take this shock on a full-on beatdown ride on one of my favorite Black Diamond trails, Nighthawk, rocky, technical, super steep, plus a trail I ride all the time, and I just rode recently on the air shock, so it'll be my first kind of air versus coil test. Which one will I like more? I don't know, this is gonna be interesting.